The pages of history are filled with tales of conflicts that shaped the world. From the dusty battlefields of the ancient Near East to the rolling plains of medieval Europe and the vast waters of the Pacific Ocean, these pivotal clashes have left an indelible mark on human civilization. They represent moments of triumph and defeat, of empires rising and falling, and of new powers emerging to redefine the global balance. Through warfare, societies have changed their destinies, forging alliances, developing innovative technologies, and leaving cultural footprints that echo through the centuries. This exploration will delve into 5 seminal battles, each of which permanently altered the course of history. These conflicts include the Battle of Megiddo, the Battle of Marathon, the Battle of Hastings, the Battle of Agincourt, and the Battle of Midway. Each story reveals the motivations, strategies, and lasting consequences that reached far beyond a single battlefield or generation. In tracing the legacies of these battles, we gain insight into the evolving nature of warfare. From the chariot and bronze-era armies of the ancient world to the disciplined phalanxes of classical Greece, the mounted knights and archers of medieval Europe, and the high-stakes carrier warfare of World War II. By examining their outcomes, we see how each victory, defeat, alliance, or betrayal has shaped societies, cultures, languages, and ideologies. These pivotal events bridge the gap between past and present, reminding us that even modern political and social structures remain influenced by choices made long ago. Here begins the story of 5 battles that changed the world. 1. The dawn of civilization. The Battle of Megiddo, c. through 1450 BC. Megiddo stands as one of the most critical crossroads of the ancient Near East, a junction where trade routes converged and regional powers contended for supremacy. It was more than a mere city. It was a prize that commanded the passage to economic wealth and territorial expansion. During this era, Egypt had begun to assert itself as a formidable empire, led by the mighty Pharaoh Thutmose III. Under his reign, Egypt experienced a time of significant prosperity, military innovation, and administrative reforms. Yet, despite this growing power, Egyptian dominance was not uncontested. The city-states of Canaan, allied under various local rulers, sought to challenge Egyptian influence, hoping to seize control of critical trade routes and restore their own autonomy. Pharaoh Thutmose III recognized the strategic importance of subduing this Canaanite coalition at Megiddo. In an impressive demonstration of statecraft, Thutmose III gathered an Egyptian army equipped with chariots and infantry trained in disciplined formations, armed with advanced weaponry for the time, such as bronze-tipped spears and composite bows. While the Egyptians had greater military resources, the terrain leading to Megiddo forced them to face challenging decisions. The roads to the city were narrow, winding through steep hills, creating potential ambush sites. Despite the inherent dangers, Thutmose III famously chose the most direct and audacious route, risking the possibility of a catastrophic ambush in order to surprise his foes and project unwavering confidence in his strategic brilliance. When the Egyptian forces finally reached Megiddo, the Canaanite coalition had gathered within the city and its surroundings, preparing to hold out for a potentially lengthy siege. They did not anticipate the speed or determination with which the Egyptian host would march into the region, nor did they expect the disciplined tactics honed under Thutmose III. The battle itself demonstrated the power of the Egyptian chariot corps, which functioned not only as a shock force, but also as a highly mobile ranged unit capable of breaking enemy lines with arrow volleys. On the other hand, the Canaanites relied on traditional infantry and smaller chariot contingents, but their alliance was marred by competing interests, and a lack of centralized command. A critical moment in the conflict arose when the Egyptians managed to outflank and corner a large segment of the Canaanite defenders. Chariots rushed through narrow passages, scattering their adversaries with coordinated cavalry charges and precise archery. The psychological impact of these swift, relentless maneuvers battered the morale of the defenders. In the face of such a well-trained force, many Canaanite leaders retreated behind Megiddo's walls, opting to hold out in the fortress rather than challenge Egypt in open combat. However, their hopes of withstanding an extended siege were dashed as the Egyptians, triumphant on the battlefield, swiftly surrounded the city. The siege that followed tested the Egyptian army's logistical and organizational capabilities. Yet, the Egyptians pressed with unyielding resolve, cutting off supply routes to the besieged city and eventually forcing the Canaanites to surrender. The outcome of the Battle of Megiddo thus secured the Egyptian hold on Canaan and the Levant, cementing Egypt's reputation as the dominant power in the region. Beyond its immediate consequences, the battle contributed to the creation of an empire that spanned the Nile and extended deep into the Near East. Egyptian culture, religion, and administration methods took root in the conquered areas, shaping the identity and governance of these territories for generations. In addition to the geopolitical consequences, the Battle of Megiddo revealed essential lessons about planning, strategy, and surprise. Thutmose III's decision to take a perilous route through narrow mountain passes to strike directly at Megiddo is often cited as an early example of bold military leadership. The success of the chariot as a key instrument of war also signaled a shift in how battles would be waged in the following centuries. Armies around the region began to emulate or adapt to the Egyptian model, integrating chariots into their forces and looking to replicate the organizational successes that had led to Megiddo's fall. This battle, etched into the historical record not only by ancient scribes, but also by the physical remains at the archaeological site, reverberated across millennia. Its legacy underscores the power of unified command, innovative tactical thinking, and the sweeping influence that one decisive engagement can exert on the trajectory of an entire civilization. 2. Rise of the Persian Empire. The Battle of Marathon, 490 BC. Fast forward to a different realm of antiquity, where the sun-scorched plains of the Aegean world bore witness to a clash that would echo through Greek lore. The Battle of Marathon stands as a testament to the resilience and resourcefulness of a smaller force determined to defend its homeland against a vast imperial juggernaut. Here, the protagonists were the soldiers of Athens and their allies, led by the legendary Miltiades, facing the army of the Persian king Darius V. This confrontation would shape the destiny of classical Greece and alter the broader course of Mediterranean power struggles. In the decades leading up to Marathon, Persia had solidified itself as a formidable empire, stretching from the Indus River to Asia Minor and occasionally pressing westward into the Greek sphere of influence. Greek city-states, fiercely independent and often rivalrous among themselves, perceived Persian expansion as a grave threat. Athens, an emerging power with democratic leanings, stood at the forefront of this struggle. When the Persian fleet landed on the shores of Attica, near the town of Marathon, the stage was set for an engagement that would determine the survival of Athenian ideals and independence. The Athenian army gathered, outnumbered yet bound by a common cause. Miltiades, who had once served within Persian ranks as a governor in the Thracian region, possessed critical insights into Persian tactics. He recognized that Persian cavalry, lightly armed infantry, and archers posed unique threats, especially in open terrain, where mobility and ranged attacks could devastate Greek hoplites. The Greek response was innovative in its simplicity, the phalanx formation. Heavily armed hoplites formed a wall of overlapping shields, projecting long spears outward in a bristling defense and offense. By maintaining discipline, the Athenians could negate the Persian advantage of superior numbers and reduce the effectiveness of their archers. On the day of battle, Miltiades deployed his forces in a way that subtly shifted weight to the flanks. The Persian center, expecting a uniform phalanx, became vulnerable as the Greeks charged forward in a sudden assault. Persian archers loosed volleys of arrows, but the heavily armored hoplites pressed on, determined to close the distance quickly and engage in close-quarters combat, where their shields and spears proved far more effective than the lighter Persian gear. Seeing the Greek line holding firm under missile fire, Persian confidence began to waver. The pivotal moment occurred when the stronger Greek flanks crushed the Persian wings, causing confusion and panic within their ranks. The Persians found themselves enveloped and unable to coordinate a unified defense or retreat. This shift in momentum compelled many Persian soldiers to flee back to their ships, while others fell to the relentless phalanx assault. By day's end, the Athenians emerged victorious, having defended their homeland and inflicted heavy losses on an imperial force once deemed invincible. The ramifications of Marathon were enormous. This victory checked Persian expansion into mainland Greece, preserving the nascent political experiments in Athens, chief among them the evolution of democracy. The sense of pride and unity that emerged among the Greek city-states in the aftermath of Marathon would lay the groundwork for future cooperation against external threats, culminating in the broader coalition of Greek polities that faced Xerxes' vast invasion a decade later. Perhaps more compelling, the battle left an indelible mark on Western cultural and intellectual history, reinforcing ideals of civic duty, courage, and valor. These values were celebrated in art and literature, echoing through the centuries in works that commemorated the Athenian triumph over an overwhelmingly superior force. The legend of the messenger who ran from Marathon to Athens to announce victory, collapsing upon his arrival, became a symbol of heroic endurance and patriotic sacrifice, though the exact historical details remain debated. Still, it is a powerful narrative that highlights the existential stakes of the conflict. This episode highlights how warfare can pivot not merely on raw numbers, but on strategic ingenuity, solidarity, and the fierce resolve of a people defending their way of life. Ultimately, Marathon set the stage for the next chapter of Greek history, ensuring that the city-states retained the freedom to develop their distinctive cultures and political institutions, which would later inform Western civilization for millennia. Birth of a nation. The Battle of Hastings, 1066 AD. In the medieval world, warfare was constantly evolving, shaped by technological innovations, shifting alliances, and cultural exchanges. One of the most iconic battles of this era took place on the southern coast of England, where two armies met in a clash that would profoundly alter the landscape of an entire nation. The year was 1066, and the contenders for the English throne were King Harold Godwinson and Duke William of Normandy. Their meeting at Hastings would not only decide the immediate fate of the English crown, but would also set in motion transformations that resonated through centuries of English history. England in the mid-11th century was a patchwork of Anglo-Saxon traditions, influenced by Norse and other Germanic peoples, supported by a sophisticated administrative system. Harold Godwinson had recently taken the throne following the death of King Edward the Confessor, but his claim was not undisputed. Across the English Channel, Duke William argued that Edward had promised the English crown to him, fueling an ambition that would lead him to assemble a formidable invasion force. The Normans, descended from Viking settlers in northern France, combined a knightly culture with organizational efficiency. Their knights, clad in mail, wielding lances and swords, and supported by archers, represented a new approach to warfare that leveraged cavalry charges and combined arms in ways less familiar to the English. When William's army arrived on the shores of Sussex, King Harold was exhausted from another battle against Norwegian invaders in the north. Nevertheless, he rushed southward with his huscarls, elite Saxon infantry, and a levy of the feared, commoners called to defend the realm. They formed a defensive shield wall on a ridge, relying on the time-honored Anglo-Saxon technique of locking their large shields together in a strong line. This tactic had proven effective in various conflicts, capable of withstanding enemy charges if discipline was maintained. The Normans, however, brought archers who could weaken the shield wall from a distance, as well as cavalry that could exploit any disruption or gap. The battle began with Norman archers loosing volleys of arrows, testing the resilience of the Saxon line. As the shields absorbed many of the arrows, William ordered infantry advances. The Saxons held firm, using their long axes and swords to repel the attackers. Attempts at cavalry charges up the slope resulted in fierce clashes, with the charging Normans struggling against the steep terrain and the solid Saxon defense. At several points, rumors of Duke William's death spread through the Norman ranks, threatening to dissolve their morale. Yet William, realizing the danger, rode before his troops, lifted his helmet to display his face, and rallied them to fight on. A turning point emerged when pockets of Normans feigned retreat, possibly by accident during a chaotic push, drawing sections of the Saxon line forward in pursuit. As discipline broke and groups of Saxons chased the fleeing Normans, William's cavalry wheeled around and trapped these pockets, cutting them down before they could regroup. The shield wall, once an impenetrable barrier, began to fray. Leadership struggles and exhaustion set in, and the Normans capitalized on every misstep. Finally, the death of King Harold, later immortalized in the Bayeux tapestry as having been struck through the eye by an arrow, scattered the last Saxon defenders, allowing the Normans to claim victory. The consequences of the Norman triumph at Hastings were monumental. William took the throne as William the Conqueror, initiating the Norman conquest of England. This event brought about dramatic shifts in land ownership, as Norman nobles were rewarded with estates confiscated from Anglo-Saxon lords. The feudal system was entrenched, affecting socio-economic structures for centuries. Equally significant were the linguistic and cultural transformations that occurred in the wake of the conquest. Norman French melded with Anglo-Saxon, eventually evolving into Middle English, the precursor to the modern English language. This linguistic fusion left an enduring mark on English vocabulary and expression. The Battle of Hastings symbolizes the birth of a new era, weaving together elements of Norman, Saxon, and broader European traditions into the fabric of English identity. Its reverberations carried on through law, governance, architecture, and literature, setting the stage for centuries of monarchic rule. From the vantage point of history, 1066 stands as a watershed moment, demonstrating how one decisive battle can redefine a nation's destiny. The global power shift. The Battle of Agincourt, 1415 AD. Within the sprawling Hundred Years' War between England and France, there were numerous engagements that shaped the rivalry between these two emerging nation-states. Yet few battles captured the drama and significance of the conflict like Agincourt. Fought on muddy fields in northern France, this pivotal encounter pitted a weary English force under King Henry V against a numerically superior French army. Ultimately, the outcome would reshape not only the arc of the 100 Years' War, but also warfare itself, reinforcing the power of the English longbow in medieval combat and highlighting a sea change in military tactics. King Henry V embarked on a campaign to assert his claims over parts of France, a continuation of the long-standing dispute that had begun generations earlier. His initial success at Harfleur came at great cost. Disease and attrition weakened his ranks. Determined to return to England before winter, he led his forces northward, seeking the relative safety of Calais. The French, intent on halting his retreat, gathered a massive army. Among them were knights, men-at-arms, and some crossbowmen, forming one of the most formidable hosts in medieval Europe. Their confidence was bolstered by numerical superiority, better provisioning, and the familiarity of fighting on home soil. Yet, as the French encountered the English near Agincourt, the terrain worked decidedly against them. Autumn rains had soaked the fields into thick mud. Forced into a narrow area flanked by woods, the French knights faced constraints on their mobility and the risk of bottlenecking during cavalry charges. King Henry V capitalized on these conditions by positioning his archers, wielders of the lethal English longbow, in optimal vantage points. The English longbow was a marvel of medieval technology, capable of launching arrows at long range with enough force to pierce armor under the right conditions. This gave the English a decisive edge, enabling them to pick off advancing French troops long before they could close ranks. When the battle commenced, waves of French cavalry and infantry slogged forward, hampered by the deep mud. As they advanced, they were met by a storm of arrows. Many knights, weighed down by plate armor, struggled to maintain their footing on the slippery ground. Horses panicked under the relentless arrow volleys, and chaos erupted within the French lines. Those who reached the English positions found themselves physically spent and confused, ill-prepared to battle the still-standing English men-at-arms. Repeated assaults failed to break the English defensive line, and as casualties mounted, the French position devolved into desperate disorder. The resulting English victory at Agincourt was staggering, particularly in the disparity of losses. While the English suffered casualties, the French losses were catastrophic, including numerous high-ranking nobles and knights. News of the victory resounded across Europe, bolstering England's morale and fortifying King Henry V's position as a capable, divinely favored leader. Despite eventually losing the broader contest for ultimate dominance in France, owing to Joan of Arc's resurgence of French fortunes and internal English struggles, Agincourt's impact transcended the immediate scope of the 100 Years' War. Agincourt exposed profound shifts in medieval warfare. It highlighted the vulnerability of the mounted knight in the face of disciplined, ranged infantry tactics. It underscored the necessity of more adaptable battle plans, incorporating varied unit types and paying closer attention to terrain and logistical considerations. The battle also reinforced national identities. In England, Agincourt became a cornerstone of patriotic folklore, featured in ballads, chronicles, and later immortalized by William Shakespeare's dramatization of King Henry V's stirring leadership and the Band of Brothers speech. At a broader level, the successes of the English in the early 15th century, fueled by the longbow and strategic acumen, foreshadowed the waning era of feudal mounted knights. Over time, improved projectile weapons and emerging gunpowder technologies would render heavy cavalry charges less decisive. The Battle of Agincourt thus remains a key reference point for historians tracing the arc of medieval warfare, marking a transitional stage between the noble chivalric contests of old and the more modern, technologically driven conflicts of subsequent centuries. The World on Fire, the Battle of Midway, 1942 AD. Leaping forward into the 20th century, warfare had transformed into a global struggle for power with industrialized nations vying for resources, influence, and ideological supremacy. World War II, with its sweeping scale and deadly innovations, saw battles that raged across continents and oceans. Amid this monumental conflict, the Pacific Theater was a crucible for naval supremacy, with the Imperial Japanese Navy and the United States Navy locked in a deadly contest for dominance. At the center of this clash stood the Battle of Midway, a pivotal engagement that would definitively shift the balance of power in the Pacific. By 1942, Japan had established an expansive perimeter of captured territories throughout Southeast Asia and the Pacific, bolstering its strategic positions and resource lines. The success of the Japanese had been bolstered by a powerful fleet, led by aircraft carriers brimming with capable pilots and planes. American forces, reeling from the attack on Pearl Harbor and desperate to halt the Japanese advance, looked for a chance to turn the tide. Intelligence breakthroughs, particularly advancements in code breaking, gave the United States the lead it needed. American cryptanalysts had deciphered a significant portion of Japanese communication codes, allowing them to anticipate the next major offensive against Midway Atoll. Armed with this crucial knowledge, Admiral Chester W. Nimitz orchestrated a plan to counter the Japanese strike. He dispatched the U.S. carriers USS Enterprise, USS Hornet, and USS Yorktown, still under repair from damages sustained at the Battle of the Coral Sea, but rushed back into service, to lie in wait northeast of Midway. The Japanese, under Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, advanced with an imposing task force that included 4 frontline carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu. Their aim was to lure out the U.S. fleet and deliver a crushing blow. On June 4, 1942, Japanese aircraft launched from their carriers to strike Midway Atoll, while U.S. land-based planes and carrier-launched aircraft positioned themselves to ambush the Japanese fleet. The opening stages were fraught with tension and sacrifice, as early American torpedo bomber squadrons attacked without adequate fighter support. They suffered devastating losses, yet their efforts forced the Japanese carriers to maneuver, buying precious time. This lull in Japanese defensive readiness opened a window for the U.S. dive bombers to strike with lethal precision. In rapid succession, Akagi, Kaga, and Soryu were hit by bombs that ignited fuel and munitions, transforming these mighty vessels into raging infernos. The surviving Japanese carrier, Hiryu, mounted a desperate counterattack that gravely damaged the USS Yorktown, but U.S. forces retaliated, finding Hiryu and subjecting it to the same fate as its sister ships. When the smoke cleared, 4 Japanese carriers lay beneath the waves, and the Imperial Japanese Navy was dealt a blow from which it would never fully recover. The significance of Midway cannot be overstated. In one stroke, the United States not only stopped the Japanese offensive, but also seized the initiative in the Pacific. Carrier warfare, relatively new at the start of World War II, was now indisputably the linchpin of naval engagements. Rather than confronting enemy fleets in traditional battleship duels, victory hinged on control of the skies and precision airstrikes from floating airfields at sea. The lessons of Midway influenced naval strategy for the remainder of the war and well beyond, shaping the evolution of carrier-based operations in modern navies. In the broader context of World War II, Midway marked the moment when the tide of conflict in the Pacific definitively turned in America's favor. Coupled with other Allied successes, it signaled a global shift in momentum, as Axis powers faced simultaneous setbacks on multiple fronts. For post-war geopolitics, the triumph at Midway heralded the rise of the United States as a dominant naval power, reinforcing its capacity to project influence across the world's oceans. The entire Pacific campaign, though long and brutal, had found its focal turning point in these storied waters, where cunning, bravery, and technology merged to shape the future. From the dusty roads near Megiddo to the storm-tossed waters around Midway, the story of warfare is an ever-evolving tapestry of innovation, leadership, and unyielding determination. Each victory and defeat has forged new paths of political dominance, cultural exchange, and technological progress. The battles of Megiddo, Marathon, Hastings, Agincourt, and Midway illustrate how a single confrontation can reverberate across centuries, reshaping civilizations and sowing the seeds for future conflicts. They remind us that history is never static. Each choice, each gamble, and each stroke of a sword or launch of a plane can influence the destiny of nations. In studying these milestones, we gain a more profound understanding of how societies organize themselves for war, how they leverage technology, and how they unify or break under the weight of invasion. These 5 battles may be separated by vast distances in time and geography, but they share a thematic thread. In each, determination, strategy, and adaptation proved decisive. The lessons from these engagements continue to echo in military academies, strategic think tanks, and the collective consciousness of modern powers, from ancient chariot tactics to carrier-based warfare. The relentless march of progress in the art of war has mirrored the equally relentless pursuit of power and security among human communities. As the world changes, these histories remain, cautioning us about the delicate balance between ambition and hubris, and illuminating how the human story, above all else, stands defined by both the hardships and triumphs we face when the clash of arms resounds.